my name is Lauren Preston. I work in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with Erica. I would like to welcome you all to this wonderful conversation that we're having with the filmmaker, Shalini Kantaya, and we're also going to have our fireside chat with Laura Hawes and Sanjay Raman, who is the Dean of Engineering, and Laura Hawes is the Dean of CICS. We're incredibly honored to have so many influential speakers with us today. And we wanted to take some time to thank the people who were able to put this entire event together. First of all, we'd like to thank Paula Reese, CMAS, Joseph Krupp Serensky, Civic Engagement and Service Learning, Buju Dasgupta, the Rebel Network, Together Films, the marketing departments of engineering and CICS, and of course, Shalini Kantaya, Dean Laura Haas, Dean Sanjay Rama, Andy Barrios, Erica Dawson-Head, Steve Fernandez, and Alex Tubman. We ask that all of our participants mute their mics while we are listening to Shalini and our deans. But for the moment, please get comfortable, take your time, and we'll get started with this conversation. Thank you so much.
Hello, how are you? Hello, it's great to have you here. Welcome to UMass Amherst, and welcome to this wonderful, wonderful event, and we're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. I did my undergrad at Hampshire College, just down the street from UMass. It's sort of where I learned filmmaking, so I feel it very much like I've been promoted to the engineering department at UMass. So, thank you so much for having me. It's always a delight when I get to speak to people who are engaged in the making of these technologies.
Definitely. I'd love for you just to give a brief introduction into who you are. Who are you professionally? Who are you culturally?
How long do you have? Well, I'm a filmmaker and an activist, and a lot of my work has to do with disruptive technologies and how they impact the marginalized. So my last film was called Catching the Sun, and it premiered on Netflix, and it was about the potential for small-scale solar to uplift the lives of working people. And so it was kind of more of a utopian vision of a disruptive technology. And with Coded Bias, I sort of discovered the work of Joy Buolamwini and Kathy O'Neill and Sophia Moja Noble, so many brilliant data scientists and journalists and activists in the film who kind of gave me an education. I sort of fell down this rabbit hole of the potential dark side of some of the technologies that we interact with every day. And I think that what was most eye-opening to me in the making of Coded Bias was I didn't realize to what extent humans are already outsourcing our decision-making to machines. And machines are already making such important decisions about, as it was recently in the news, like what quality of healthcare someone gets, how long a prison sentence someone serves, if you get hired for a job, if you get into college. A lot of these, gatekeepers to all of these opportunities are increasingly governed by AI. And what was terrifying to me that I learned through following Joy Buolamwini's work and sort of following it down the rabbit hole is that these technologies that are making such important decisions that impact our civil rights and our civil liberties have not been vetted for bias, not for racial bias or for gender bias, sometimes not even for accuracy. There's no process in place to really, outside of the companies themselves, self-reporting to show if they're going to do harm. And so that was sort of the big realization in the making of the film, and sort of becomes sort of the flag up the pole for coded bias, is sort of amplifying the voices of so many data scientists and journalists and activists who are calling for better safeguards on these technologies and more voices in the room when we create these technologies.
And I have to say, you left something out that you did that was powerful, is brought in everyday people into this conversation. Everyday people that use these technologies and have these experiences. You also uplifted their voices and amplified them also. And I thank you for that.
No, I want to thank you too, because I'm so grateful to have this conversation with an engineering department. I've now spoken to Stanford and all of these sort of AI developers, and it's such an honor. I'm so humbled by it. And I think that that's part of what I hope to do with the film is we've really realized you have a power as an engineering school that you don't really realize. And in the last few years, we have come to realize that there is such a responsibility for scientists to communicate scientific information to the public so the public can make decisions responsibly. And what has happened around AI and around algorithms, I mean, I couldn't talk to people for many years because I was talking to all these PhD people trying to figure out what they were saying and trying to make some sense and to sort of distill PhD level research. And you can't do it, but to try to distill it into, small sound bites that are somehow visual and compelling in some way. And also what I hope to do in the film is not just communicate science in some way that has hopefully some integrity, and you all will be the judge of that, but also connect scientific knowledge to communities that are most vulnerable to its impacts. And I think that's something that Joy does beautifully when she not only has the scientific method on her side and is able to speak truth to power to very powerful companies, multinational companies, but also the fact that she is able to connect to the Brooklyn residents and write a letter on their behalf saying this stuff is racially biased and should not be implemented on civilians who are just trying to go home.
Exactly.
So that's what I hope that the film will be used, is to create a conversation where we can all sit at the table, engineers and Stanford and UMass, Amherst, people with advanced degrees, and your mom can all sit at the table and have a conversation about how these technologies impact our lives.
I think
impact all of us.
This is wonderful. I really appreciate that, because the cool thing is that you have a wonderful opportunity at UMass Amherst, because I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusive Community Development for the College of Information and Computer Science. And Steve is part of engineering in that wonderful leadership team in our engineering department. And there's also probably other colleges that are online also, other members of our community from the College of Natural Sciences and other outside colleges that might not be UMass. So you're really reaching a broad group. We wanted to bring in as much as the community as possible and make it an opportunity for everyone to learn with us. So
I just want to say
thank you.
No, I want to say thank you, because what I learned in the making of Coded Bias is that inclusion is not just like something that's like good for the pictures.
Right.
It's also something that makes us more competitive in the technologies of the future. And I learned this I sort of have more compassion after making this film, because I realize that as we're having this national conversation around bias, that it's something that we all have. It's not like, oh, these horrible people over here have human bias. It's like, no, we all have human bias.
Exactly.
And so we all need each other to shine a light into our blind spots, and to make sure that our own inherent flawed nature of human bias doesn't actually translate into technologies that cause harm. And what was so shocking, I think, in making Coded Bias was realizing that programmers and technologists who have the best of intentions, and in fact hold the values that are the exact opposite. The Amazon team wanted to create a hiring system that was less biased, right? Their intention was actually to create a hiring system that was more fair and equitable. But the AI picked up on the data, the inherent systematic inequalities, and who got hired in the past and who got promoted, and what was job retention, and without knowing it, the computer began to make the AI began to discriminate against, any candidate it could tell was a woman. And so that is a great example of how, even in spite of the programmer's best intentions, these systems can cause unintended harm.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That was so real. I think that sometimes it's difficult to see the outside sometimes and be able to see the whole world when you're somewhat in it. I have a question that has come from the audience. What is the strongest strategy for protecting privacy as AI advances? What do you see as one of the strongest strategies that we can use?
Legislation. I really feel that there needs to be a system in place. Like, we have a system in place from which food quality standards are in place, and food gets to our table, and we can rely on it here in the US of food being of a certain quality, meeting certain standards, because we have this thing called the FDA, which is what Kathy O'Neill proposes for algorithms. And it doesn't mean that you don't believe in technology. You just I believe that it should have certain standards in place before it goes from a lab to our kids' hands, basically. And so I think legislation will do that. But I think the issue is, like, one, big tech is in everything. It's in our learning research institutions. It's in our governments. It's like, it's really hard to have this kind of, and the government also has to understand it. I mean, a lot of our government officials don't know how Twitter works. It's just like there's a big gap in public education also about these systems. And yet we're not keeping pace with the pace at which these systems are being deployed. And they're being deployed at scale that is like, global and untold. And the fact that, in Coded Bias, to learn that, through Joy's research, Gender Shades, and, her colleagues, Timnit Gebru and Deborah Raji, we learn through these 3 Black women scientists. At the time, Joy was a young graduate student. And somehow they figured out this technology, failed on dark faces in a way that the 3 biggest technology companies missed. And that is like, sort of, and that goes to show that it shouldn't just be up to the technology companies to self-regulate. In Europe, they have standards. They have standards for their privacy. They've started to put data rights in a human rights framework. And that's what I came to understand in the making of the film, is that everything that we love is going to be totally transformed by AI algorithms, the marketing of our data, you know, things like fair housing and fair healthcare and fair criminal justice systems is all being touched. And until we really understand these systems and have some sort of governance where it's transparent and accountable, I feel that it is where the battle for civil rights will happen in the 21st century. Will be along these technological lines.
This is a wonderful lead into my question that I have here.
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to start it off because you've already started it with what you just said. The scholars and activists raising concerns about coded bias in AI. You mentioned Joy, Kathy, Meredith. I'm just going to go through a few that were in the movie. Virginia, Safia, Zinette, and Amy are all women. I think there was one male scholar that might have been featured.
Ravi, he's a lawyer. Yes, British
Right.
lawyer. Yes.
Can you comment on this, and what degree have you found a gender disparity among those who explore coded bias and social concerns over AI? These leaders.
That is an incredible question. I'm so glad that you were the first person to frame it that way, because most people frame it around, why is your film all women? And I say, you know, it has the same gender ratios as many films about AI. They're just flipped. But I found I didn't set out to make a film that centered the voices of women and people of color. Although I am someone who is very conscientious about who I choose as experts in my films. I'm someone who thinks about whose voice I'm lending authority to through the medium of documentary. But what I found, it is that it is women, people of color, LGBT, other marginalized communities, religious minorities, who are leading in the fight in ethics in AI. And I think it's because they both have the advanced degrees. It's one of the smartest group of people I've ever met. They're I think there were 7 PhDs in the film, all data scientists and advanced mathematicians. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they had this other perspective as an outsider that allowed them to see something that others missed, and to see how these technologies would work on communities the technology wasn't optimized for, you know, mm-hmm. or maybe what, you know. So I really think that there was a moment in the edit where I sat back and I'm like, oh, it's all women. Good. and then I was like, is it a woman's film then? And I decided it wasn't, because women are not minorities, although we would not know that if you look at documentaries about technology. And so I'm actually really grateful. And now that the film is done, I sort of lean back and say, you know what? As a result of the film, I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had about AI that have been completely women or centering voices of color. And I'm so grateful every time I have a conversation like that, because I feel that the film is recentering who gets heard in these conversations. And I think that I want to shift our thinking about this, because this is a conversation about inclusion. This to me is not about a social service. This to me is actually about unleashing the genius of half the population. It is about unleashing imagination and innovation that has been untapped until now. And so one of the things I'm proud of is that it sort of gives voice to genius that is, I think, underrepresented in some of the dialogues of these technologies.
I thank you for that, because I actually watched it was a webinar yesterday with NC Wit, and Dr. I think it's Nikki Washington actually made reference to many of the women that were featured in the film and talked about their leadership in this important task, and gave acknowledgement to all of the people. Actually had pictures. It was really beautiful. This is another question that we have. There are hidden cultural messages in this film, such as there was this scene where they're at the hair salon, and she's getting her hair done. Joy is getting her hair done, and Joy comes up with this wonderful poem talking about algorithms and talking about the movement. And then throughout the scene, Joy is wearing Wakanda earrings. Okay. What did you hope to achieve by adding these messages into the film? And some of the questions we had were, was this to bring people into Black culture? Was it trying to acknowledge value in Black culture? And just for anybody that doesn't know, the hair salon is the mecca for Black women. A lot of Black women love the hair salon, and it's where a lot of magic happens. There's even been movies written about the barber shop. So for people that understand these messages and that see them, they recognize them. Other people might not recognize them. What do you think about that? And what was your thinking?
That was really kind. Well, that was actually Joy's idea, which I think, and I loved it. I felt very privileged because it's like what you said. I know if my girlfriend says she's going to the hair salon, I'm not going to see her that day. And a lot of stuff happens in the hair salon. And so what I did love, though, the choice that I'm proud of, that I love there, was actually using that place that is so intimate for Black women to talk about technology, which is not usually something that two things that you would associate together. And to me, it was just about Joy's character, that all those things sort of came back. I mean, her earring choice were her own, where she wanted to be filmed was her own. And I think that she is very much someone who connects culture and history to her practice of technology. And so that was showcased in the film.
Thank you so much for that. That was like a personal question. I'm just saying.
No, it was a great question. I love that very much.
You thought you were sneaking it by. No.
So
Those
earrings. I mean, that scene was one of my favorite scenes in the film.
I've been searching for a pair of those earrings. So, okay. So a question we have is, can you elaborate on the quote from the film that, and this is a loose quote, that the most punitive and invasive surveillance focused tools go into poor communities first. And then it goes on to talk about the rich people get the benefit from them after they're tested. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's Virginia Eubanks who wrote an amazing book called Automating Inequality that everyone should read, where she does studies, 3 case studies that are quite extraordinary. One of an AI system being used by foster care to determine if you're going to abuse your child, that claims an algorithm that claims to be able to predict whether you'll abuse your child. And you can imagine this impacts communities of color disparately. She talks about the automation of Virginia Eubanks writes about the automation of benefits, like healthcare, welfare benefits, medical benefits, and what that means when these systems become automated and they start to filter out people who can't use these technologies in the same way, and there isn't a human in the loop, or a mistake is made somewhere in the algorithm and there isn't a human in the loop to see. And so, and these types of invasive surveillance technologies, you can even look at the platform we're on, Zoom. The way that they were proposing first to do privacy was to have a tiered system where if you're paying for the platform, you get privacy rights. And if you don't pay for the platform, you don't. And so you can see how that starts to become a tiered system where people who can afford it have their privacy, and people who can't don't. You can see, you know, the things that I saw, I couldn't even believe. The fact that this is like being used to show how dangerous someone is in probation sentencing in Philadelphia. And someone like LaTanya Myers, who's featured in the film, who's a criminal justice activist, had the real life consequence where she would have to report like twice a week, was being judged as high risk when she got accolades from the mayor and from her city council for the work that she was doing on criminal justice, had been a model citizen since she was released. And what she said was this was overriding a judge and a probation officer. And it felt like there was no appeal. And she said, I thought this was a system that was based on redemption. I'm trying to do my best to redeem myself.
Yes.
And this algorithm keeps saying I'm a risk to society no matter what I do. And you can see how this creates a kind of determinism because you're pulling from the past. So
Wow.
so that is, I don't know if that answered your question.
It's perfect. It's a perfect answer. That actually leads me to my next question. Can you believe you have all these questions looped up? You're perfect at this. Kathy O'Neill, the author of Weapons of Math Destruction, just clarifying that, mentions the concern over the fact that private companies own the code for many AI algorithms and that there are no appeal systems. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on this concern a little bit more than what you just did and discuss, if anything, what is being done to actually address this? That's the idea. What are we doing to address some of these concerns?
We need some laws. Yeah, we need some laws. What Kathy's describing is sort of these black box algorithms, and in a lot of the examples, some examples are in the film, like when Steve Wozniak, one of the founders of Apple, said, "Why do I have a different credit score? Why is the Apple credit card giving me a different score than my wife? We have all the same assets." And it could be that the algorithm is picking up on the fact that women have a shorter history of getting mortgages, a shorter history of getting credit because of systematic inequality. And so, and at the same time, that, she happens to be married to Steve Wozniak. I think she's going to be all right with her credit score. But for the rest of us, that could be a lot of that could have real life impacts for a woman who is getting a different credit line than a man. And we have no way of knowing what went into that decision because it's a black box. And there are some AI companies that are making a movement towards what would more transparency look like? How would we create a system where you could go back and check and vet and have a human be able to check the work of a computer to know what was in that score? And so I think that is what Kathy's sort of talking about. And it can be even something with as subtle as our information systems. Like if I do a search for anything of Indian content, and then everything in my feed is Indian all of a sudden. It has happened to me in YouTube where I like search for some recipe and all of a sudden I was like, wow, it rearranged who it thought I was, and now I'm this person. It's very interesting to me how we feel sometimes stereotyped by, I like to know what other people of different political viewpoints are saying. I like to have some sort of creative dialogue. And, the concern also with information is that it's also keeping us in these silos and in these bubbles.
Mhm.
That prevent us from talking to one another in ways that are productive.
Wow, thank you so much. The question I have for you is, the next question is talking about this film and the use/abuse of technology in China, the UK, and the United States. In China, the technology is used by the government to regulate and control people. How would you compare this use or abuse to what takes place in the UK with 6 million cameras that's the quote from the film, and in the US with the collection of big data by private industry to determine decision making for ads, political messaging, college admissions, as you mentioned before, credit worthiness, just as you mentioned before, jobs, and medical care?
Well, that was a big question.
It's huge.
What I will say is that I think that the film tries to show different approaches to data protection and governance. In China, we see what it looks like to have unfettered access to someone's data and have a system where you have a credit score on your face, something as intimate as your face. And at the same time, we're sort of all walking that line. We're like, wow, that was so convenient, and not always thinking about what we're giving up in exchange for this efficiency. In Europe, there are some laws. There is a GDPR. There is a framework for human rights. People do have some protections of their data. It is far more civilized than we have in the US or in China. And it's unknown what will happen to the UK as the UK leaves Europe, what will happen to their rights around data protection. I live in a city like London. I live in New York. That's where I am now.
Oh, cool.
But we also have a ton of cameras, CCTV cameras here in the city. And that number has grown since 9/11, certainly. And I think in London, there's 6 million. I feel like there's at least that many here in New York. I don't have exact numbers, so don't quote me on the numbers in New York. But I think that in here, I have no information and no way of getting information of what's happening because there are no laws. So I can't, to the best of my knowledge, I can't even file a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request to police to have them share how they're using facial recognition. There's no way of even, these tools are often used in secret. There was a Detroit man that was stopped in January, arrested in front of his family and his neighbors, held for 30 hours, never asked for his ID. I don't have to tell you the race of this man, right? And basically never asked for his ID. And it came out that it was the first US man knowingly stopped for misidentification by facial recognition, right? And of course, he was a Black man. And so that happened, and the Detroit police doubled down and said they would continue to use facial recognition in spite of this. And the UK has also, Silky, Carlo, and Big Brother Watch are continuing to challenge it, but the metropolitan use of real-time use of facial recognition has been deemed legal, and or groups are continuing to challenge it. So you can see that we're just like entering this other age of
Right.
invasive surveillance technologies. And I just want to say that, like, as an artist, as a non-engineer, I learned that there was always this conversation between artists and actually technologists designing AI through the work of Meredith Broussard in her book Artificial Unintelligence. But what I wanted to say is that I think that sometimes limitations define creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It's my hope that our democratic ideals, the limitation of our democratic values, will sort of be encoded into the technologies of the future. That the power that technologists have should not be in the hands of the few. That we need ethicists in the room, and we need, sort of regulators in the room, and we need sort of civil society in the room. So, and more diversity, people like Joy and Deborah and Timnit, and Kathy, to keep the pulse.
Thank you so much for that. I see that we're blowing up a little bit and we're starting to have some questions coming in on our chat. So I'm going to start throwing those questions out to you so that we can get some of this information going on. I have one question that was sent in, and it says, the FDA does randomized controlled experiments on drug trials. What could be the AI version of that? And it says also, what might be the criteria specified by federal regulations that determine what type of accuracy is good enough for AI informed decision software?
Ooh, question above my pay scale. I really feel that this is a question for an AI developer. Like, I really think that in terms of figuring out what would this FDA look like, what kind of safety measures should we put in place, how could technologies actually be vetted to make sure that they're safe and don't do undue harm. I know that people like Kathy O'Neill have companies that do exactly this for private companies, where they are involved in doing exactly this kind of work. So I can't tell you in terms of being an artist, a filmmaker, I don't have a qualification to answer that question. But I do want to say that I know that Kathy has a company that's doing it. I know that the Algorithmic Justice League is also part of that conversation around how do we create systems that have an outside vetting model. So I would check out Kathy O'Neill's. I think she's mathbabe.org is her blog. I mean, mathbabe is her Twitter feed. But she has really good resources, I think, about how to vet algorithms.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Another question that we have is that it's sort of a statement question. This is an important film. We need many influencers and everyday people to see this, but documentaries often are not widely seen. How is the film being released / marketed? What's your plan?
Thank you so much for that. The film is releasing theatrically next week. You can tell your friends to see it. You can find more information at codedbias.com/virtual cinema, and I'll drop that in the chat for everybody to see. So it is the first time that virtual cinema, that the film will be available at the Metrograph Theater starting next week. There will also be 2 free panels, one November 11th And that will be with Kathy O'Neill and Joy
Nice.
Golden Weenie, my dream sort of panel, interviewed by Wired moderator Sydney Fusel, who writes on surveillance. And there will be another panel on November 19th at the Coolidge Theater. And so that's all coming up. And then we will be available more widely in the spring. But the big push is really to see it in theaters. So please support the film by getting your friends to a theater. You can also sponsor a screening, and there's information about that, how you can get a discount by bringing 50 people to the theater.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're going to have to make those announcements in our colleges when we go back.
Oh, thank you.
Everything's virtual nowadays, so send out the message. The next question I have is, can you share insights about what making the film taught you, and how best to discuss AI with people from diverse socioeconomic and skill backgrounds?
Well, I believe that the best way to talk about AI is to share the film. That's why I spent so many years making it. I really hope in 80 minutes or 90 minutes that it can be something that people of all ages and backgrounds and classes can engage with as relevant to them. I really hope that that's true. That was my intention as an artist. And then what was the first question? The first question was about.
The question reads, can you share insights about what making the film taught you?
Yeah, what I learned. Well, I will say that what I learned is that I feel like I make documentaries to remind myself that everyday people can make a huge difference. And I've seen that in the making of this film, where a few people working together can change an industry. That is no exaggeration. I saw it happening. I mean, in June, three of the largest companies, IBM, Microsoft, and Amazon, all changed their policies on facial recognition. IBM said it would not research or deploy facial recognition. Microsoft said it would not sell it to police, and Amazon said it would press pause for a year. And that was like sea change that we never thought was possible when I first started making the film. And I think that happened because of a combination of things. I think it happened through the bravery of scientific research by Joy and others in the film, proving that facial recognition had racial bias, and also people in the streets making the connection between invasive surveillance technology that's been proven to be racially biased and the potential harm it could do to Black life if used by law enforcement. And I think those two things working together resulted in the technology companies themselves putting this down. And my argument was like, that was an incredible gesture. And I'm so grateful that happened, and grateful to all the people, all the sort of foot soldiers that sort of made that happen. But also, it shouldn't be up to the tech companies completely, that there should be other safety measures in place when you're talking about tech that is as powerful as AI.
And that leads to the next question. I don't know. I think these people are all communicating with each other because it's a perfect lead-in. The question is the U.S. doing anything of promise on a coordinated level, basically at a national level, to get ahead of the existential challenges presented by big data and AI? What are we doing on a national level? Can you just run through a few of the things? You did mention some things earlier, but anything else that we need to know that we can support?
That's a great question. We have a take action page on the codedbias.com website. It has a lot of great work being done by our partners, the Algorithmic Justice League, the ACLU, Mi Gente, who has a No Tech for ICE campaign, and so many others. And I think you can support one of their great campaigns on the ground. There's a lot of also information on the site. And then come out to one of the panels and be part of the conversation and tell your friends to be part of the conversation.
I know. Thank you for that. Thank you for that wonderful explanation. Let's see. Oh my gosh, we have another question that has appeared. How about the people creating this technology? What is our role in training the next crop of engineer and computer scientists? Should we incorporate more issues of bias and social justice more prominently in our curriculum? And today we will have the Dean of Engineering and the Dean of Computer Science. They're already in the room, and they're going to be talking a little bit later and having this fireside chat. Do we need to talk about these things? Are these things part of engineering? I mean, it's not, is it? Or is it part of computer science?
Well,
how does this come in?
It shouldn't be all your, it's what Kathy O'Neill says. It says, like, you know, mathematicians shouldn't be making these big ethical decisions in society. You know, these decisions should be made elsewhere and we should just be writing it, you know? And I think that it has become that. And so I do think, given how AI is going to touch every sector of society, that engineering students, AI developers should be required to take an ethic, you know, like a course in ethics, might want to take a critical race theory class, or a, you know, sort of something that sort of also gives in sci-fi, in Alex Garland's new series Devs, it basically says, like, people who know so little about the past shouldn't be charged with predicting the future. And I thought that was a great thing of, like, how you have to know something about history in order to predict the future in some way. And so I do think that the study of AI and the development of AI, if we're going to have different outcomes than China, if that's the goal, if it's not just endless efficiency and we don't care what happens to our civil rights, then it's a different conversation. But if we're trying to build a technological culture that is in keeping within human rights, and in that I mean the inherent value of every human being, if we want technology that sort of acknowledges the inherent value of every human being, then we need to have a different conversation, and we need different people to be part of that conversation.
I thank you so much for that. It's really important. In our college, we compute for the common good, and I think that we're trying to think of ways, how do we balance tradition versus innovation and still remain at the forefront and leaders in the things that we're teaching. So I really appreciate that point of view, that if you are looking at it from a context of innovation and actually giving students what they need, we should be incorporating these different discussions within engineering and within computer science and other majors, doing the same, because understanding these technological pieces are vital for all of us to understand, to protect our freedoms, as shown in your bit in the film. Thank you for that. I have another question that came in that says, so many AI software developers are in India and maybe China. Many of our grads are from these backgrounds. Why do we see this white male bias? And that's a great question. They're basically saying that if people are from India and they're from China, and many of our grads are from these backgrounds, and they're the ones that are creating a lot of this material, why do we see this white male bias? And just to kind of go into that a little bit, it talks about the culture in other countries. why would we see that white male bias? But I would love for you to answer that.
Well, I don't, again, I'm an artist. I'm not an AI developer.
Mhm.
I don't have an engineering degree.
Sure.
But I mean, I think it's because the data sets are white and male. And it's a problem that we have in science. When I'm learning, it's a problem that we have throughout science. Like I was on a panel with a Black scientist who was telling me that a lot of the study of the human genome is on 16% of the population, a white population. And because of that, we will have challenges in our study of COVID because so much of the study of the human genome is based on 16% of the white population, which has better health outcomes than the rest of the population. And so I think that from what I've learned in the making of the film, again, without advanced degrees, I think a lot of it is from the data sets themselves. And um, and that's why we have this sort of white male gaze.
Thank you so much. I think that was eloquently explained by you and Joy within the film. And I think that that's a great point that you just brought out, is that they're using the same data sets that were created using these, I guess, I don't want to say historic times, but historic information. I would like, nearing the close of our conversation, and I'd like for you to have a moment to share anything you'd like to share with our community. We are a higher education institution, and I pride myself as educating the future leaders of our world, and being a part of an amazing team that gets to do such. We are privileged. But I would love for you to give us at least a comment or something that you'd like to share with us that is really important to making this move forward.
Oh, I would just say, first of all, thank you so much for such an engaging conversation and for the time. I know what a gift it is in these times, but also that I would want engineering students to recognize the power that they have in the knowledge of this field, and to take that power of this technology very seriously in terms of having a responsibility. And I think that responsibility is one to both not leave your humanity at home, to sort of bring your humanity and your ethics into the room in the development of these technologies, and also to bring other people into the conversation, to actually share your knowledge and your expertise in finding a way to have a conversation with someone outside of your field, because you may both be better for that conversation with someone outside your field, as I am today for having this conversation with you.
I can't thank you enough. This has been such an informative discussion. I really appreciate the fact that in this conversation, I gained a broader vision and a broader understanding of how this really affects gender, and how it really disproportionately can create barriers for women, especially. And that's just one piece and one aspect that I recognize. I recognize many things throughout this video. It was very, very empowering and inspirational to see that we have people that are so equipped and so amazing at the forefront of this fight. And I hope to join them, and I hope a bunch of others will join them in this. I'd like to give a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
I can't tell you, Shalini, how I'm so happy to have you here. And I can't say how thankful we are for such a powerful discussion. Believe it or not, you are more than welcome to hang around. You are more than welcome to pop off, because I know that you probably are really busy.
I have to go, but Thank you so much. And I hope to be with you in Amherst sometime very soon.
Oh, that'll be amazing. It'd be fantastic. Now, believe it or not, we are actually rolling into a discussion where our deans are going to talk about this.